What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, July 27th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 15 game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. There's plenty of value on this slate and a lot of good mid-range plays, so I'm going to pay up for a pitcher. I like Lance McCullers Jr. with an 11% pitching advantage over a low-salary batting team, the Seattle Mariners. Lance McCullers Jr. throws his best ball versus lefty batters, giving up a .585 OPS versus lefties. And he's facing 5 lefties tonight. On top of that, the Mariners have only hit 13 of his last 67 pitches. That's a 194 batting average. He's 10,500 FanDuel salary. He's 1,000 less on DraftKings. Projected at 20.2 fantasy points here tonight, but he should score at least 25 fantasy points in this one. He has an ERA of 3.04. His record is 7-2 on the season, pitching an average of 97 pitches per game, averaging 36 fantasy points per game. He scored 27, 58, and 43 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Lance McCullers Jr. here versus the Seattle Mariners. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I got a value play for you here. I like Jesus Aguilar with a 78% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Jesus Aguilar, he's batting a .777 OPS versus righties. And Spencer Watkins, he's giving up a .854 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Watkins yet, and Jesus Aguilar is 2,800 FanDuel salary. He's 1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 16, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jesus Aguilar here versus Spencer Watkins. Okay, I also like Trey Barrera with a 111% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Matt Moore. Trey Barrera, he's currently batting a 2.583 OPS versus lefties. We're going to need more sample size, but that's a great start. And Matt Moore throws 31% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .952 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Moore yet, and Trey Barrera is only 2,400 FanDuel salary. He's 100 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 0, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Trey Barrera as a value play here versus Matt Moore. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Josh Harrison with a 42% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Matt Moore. Josh Harrison is batting 11% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .823 OPS versus lefties. And Matt Moore, we know he pitches 31% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .952 OPS versus righties. Now, the only thing I don't like about this pick is that Josh Harrison is 0 for 6 versus more, but it's still a relatively low sample size and the splits are good. And I also like this pick because Josh Harrison is only $2,800 FanDuel salary and $1,000 more on DraftKings. Projected at 8.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 6, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Josh Harrison here versus Matt Moore. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Donaldson with a 34% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Tyler Alexander. Josh Donaldson is batting a .771 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Alexander throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 43% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .937 OPS versus righties. Josh Donaldson is 2 for 4 with a 1.750 OPS versus Alexander. One of those 2 hits is a home run. And he's $3,200 FanDuel salary. He's $1,000 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 31, 6, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Tyler Alexander. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? Now, just keep an eye on the injury status of this guy. I think he's going to be playing here tonight. If he is playing, I like Jorge Polanco with a 25% batting advantage over that same low salary pitcher, Tyler Alexander. Jorge Polanco, he bats 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .757 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Alexander is giving up a .881 OPS versus switch hitters. Now I like this pick because Jorge Polanco is 4 for 7, batting a .571 batting average and a 1.142 OPS versus Alexander. He's $3,400 FanDuel salary. He's $900 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9 fantasy points in his last game. So I like Jorge Polanco here versus Tyler Alexander.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
I also like Xander Bogaerts. I think his price is pretty good on both sites, but especially on FanDuel. Xander Bogaerts has a 49% batting advantage over Robbie Ray. Bogaerts is batting 13% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .963 OPS versus lefties. And Robbie Ray, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 35% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .904 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Xander Bogaerts is 3 for 8, batting a .375 batting average and a 1.194 OPS versus Ray. One of those 3 hits is a home run. And I also like this pick because he's only $3,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 3, and 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think Xander Bogaerts is due for a big game here. And I also like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Xander Bogaerts here versus Robbie Ray. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Starling Marte with 100% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Starling Marte is batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .831 OPS versus righties, and Spencer Watkins, he's giving up a .854 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Watkins yet, and Starling Marte is $4,100 FanDuel salary. He's $1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 28, 6, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Starling Marte here versus Spencer Watkins. I also like Nelson Cruz with a 58% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Jordan Montgomery. Nelson Cruz is batting 30% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.217 OPS versus lefties. And Jordan Montgomery, he throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .764 OPS versus righties. Nelson Cruz is $4,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 16.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 0, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Nelson Cruz here versus Jordan Montgomery. I also like Brian Reynolds with a 28% batting advantage over Brett Anderson. Brian Reynolds is batting a .809 OPS versus lefties, and Brett Anderson, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 22% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .951 OPS versus switch hitters. Brian Reynolds is 3 for 8, batting a .375 batting average and a .750 OPS versus Anderson. He's $3,300 FanDuel salary, and he's only $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 19, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Brian Reynolds here versus Brett Anderson. I also like Michael Brantley. This guy's been a pretty solid player throughout the season. I think he's been a pretty nice mid-range to value play. His salary's been priced pretty low for his production. He has a 25% batting advantage over Chris Flexen. Michael Brantley, he's batting 31% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .948 OPS versus righties, and Chris Flexen is giving up a .714 OPS versus lefties. Michael Brantley is 2 for 3 with a 1.667 OPS versus Flexen. He's only $3,200 FanDuel salary, and he's $200 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 18, 12, and 9 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Chris Flexen. I also like Cedric Mullins with a 54% batting advantage over Sandy Alcantara. Cedric Mullins is batting 21% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .873 OPS versus righties, and Sandy Alcantara, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 33% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .940 OPS versus switch hitters. There's no at-bats versus Alcantara yet, But Cedric Mullins is only $3,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. And he's projected at 12.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 12, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Cedric Mullins here versus Sandy Alcantara. Now here's a value play for you. I like Brian Goodwin with a 67% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Brad Keller. Brian Goodwin is batting 48% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .844 OPS versus righties, and Brad Keller throws his worst ball versus lefty batters, 19% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .795 OPS versus lefties. Now, Brian Goodwin is 0 for 1 versus Keller, but he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Brian Goodwin here versus Brad Keller.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.